Hey everyone, I'm excited to talk to you about understanding and managing work teams, which is critical in the workplace, and for really anyone working and leading or developing teams in today's fast-paced and diverse workplace. But first, I want to ask a question. Have you ever been a part of a team that just clicked, where people communicated well, played to their strengths, and actually enjoyed working together? I'm sure some of us have experienced that. I also think some of us have experienced the opposite. So think of a time where you are a part of a team that was full of tension. Maybe there was confusion about the roles and what people played, or members who just weren't pulling in the same direction. This video is all about helping you understand why those differences happen, and more importantly, how we can create and lead effective teams. Here is what we will be unpacking. We'll talk about what makes teams effective. Teams aren't just groups of people, they are dynamic systems. And we will explore what differentiates high performing teams from ones that struggle to get off the ground. We'll also talk a little bit about how teams develop over time, and you'll learn about team development stages and how each stage has unique challenges and leadership needs. Then we'll go to um, discussing what it takes to manage a team well, from goal setting to accountability, even communication to conflict resolution. Good team management is truly both an art and a science. We'll talk about why conflict is actually a good thing in teams. If we can manage it well, conflict actually can lead to better decisions, deeper innovation, and even stronger team cohesion. Then we'll talk about diversity and how diversity can enhance team problem solving. Now, diverse teams, whether in background, thought, perspective, often outperform more homogenous groups, but they also require very intentional leadership to realize that potential. And then we'll talk about what's unique with multicultural teams. So, in our increasingly global work environment, you will need to understand how cultural differences shape communication, feedback, decision making, and even definitions of teamwork itself. So as we explore some of this topic, I encourage you to think about, maybe what role you typically take in a team setting. We all have that natural instinct or that natural place. How you personally respond to team conflict, how you can contribute to building psychological safety in a group, and how your identity and background may shape how you experience teamwork. So let's dive in and talk about what really makes a group a team and why that matters in our organizational life. So, a team is more than just a collection of people. It is a group organized to function cooperatively toward a shared purpose. And teams often aren't random, they're defined by specific elements that help them succeed. And some of those elements could be common commitment or purpose, specific performance goals, complementary skills. So this is where members bring diverse strengths to the group, commitment to how the work gets done, shared processes and norms, and mutual accountability. So ownership of outcomes together. Now, working in teams offers several benefits, and I'll go through just a few of them. But one benefit is shared accountability and effort. And when we have this, we can actually increase trust, we can increase follow through. Complementary strengths, I just mentioned, but that's a huge benefit. One person's strengths may fill in where another person might lack that skill. Another benefit is greater creativity and problem solving because ideas are cross pollinated. And then finally, I'll talk about emotional and relational support. That is extremely important in any team setting because that will fuel motivation and hopefully reduce the potential to hit burnout. So, an example could be, maybe you're a part of a company and there's a project happening on a product launch. You know, marketing will need to know the customer needs. Product design group will bring those technical skills, and then operations will ensure delivery. Now, when we have all of that expertise in the room or amongst the team, the collaboration will accelerate innovation in ways that, no lone contributor could replicate. So, talking through the characteristics of an effective team, there are several team practices that can sharpen effectiveness. So one is shared sense of urgency and direction. Another are clear norms and rules of behavior, rules of engagement, I like to say, frequent focused interaction, and regular feedback, recognition, and reward. So again, the more intentional teams are about defining why they exist, what they aim to achieve, who does what, how the work gets done, and how success is recognized, the more likely they are to outperform individual effort. Now that we understand what teams are and why they work, I think it's important to explore how teams grow and evolve over time and what roles managers or leaders play at each stage to support that evolution. I want to talk about Tuckman's stages of team development. And this is Bruce Tuckman's model, first introduced in the 60s. And Tuckman outlines 4 essential stages that teams typically progress through. The first is the forming stage. And this is where team members meet for the first time. They may be feeling excited. They may even feel some anxiety. But at this stage, they're often looking to leadership for direction. This phase is often polite, but also uncertain for many. Then we have the storming phase. This is the second phase. And this is oftentimes where conflict emerges. Team members may be testing boundaries. Maybe they're jockeying for roles and wrestling with some of those goals that the team has. The third stage is the norming stage. And this is where finally I think the team is in the groove, right? They're settling on shared norms. The roles are becoming more defined. Trust is beginning to be built. So trust is growing and collaboration solidifies oftentimes at this stage. Then we have the performing stage, and this is where we want to be. The team is operating at high effectiveness. They're self-directed, they're focused, and they're productive. And then added in the late 70s was the adjourning phase. And finally, the team may disband. And hopefully when they do, they're reflecting on accomplishments in that transition. Now, this model matters because it helps us understand the natural evolution of group behavior and explains why teams sometimes maybe feel stuck or regress. An example could be, we have a team, I feel like we're in this norming phase, we're heading towards performing, and all of a sudden we add a new team member or we change the team member's goals. That can trigger regression and maybe take us back to the storming phase where there's conflict, even after we've achieved what we think is peak performance. So drawing further on Tuckman and other research, what role do leaders play at each stage of this development model? During the forming stage, leaders should act as coordinators. You're picking the right members, you're helping to create the right environment and the conditions. You're clarifying goals and fostering shared mental models. In the storming stage, the leader's role also evolves. And this is where leaders step in as coaches. You're helping to resolve conflict, you're building trust, you're calming some of those tensions, easing that uncertainty. When teams are in norming and performing, leadership typically shifts toward empowerment. This is where leaders are often delegating decision making. They're encouraging feedback. They're equipping teams for continuous improvement. And then at the adjourning phase, leaders play more of a supportive role. They're helping the team, process outcomes and transitions. So pause and consider, think of a team that you've been a part of. When did it feel settled for you? When did conflict arise? Did any of the teams seem to go backward instead of forward at certain points? And then as a leader, as a teammate, how might you act differently in each stage? This journey from performing or from forming to performing, it's not always linear. And teams rarely move forward without friction. And it's not sequential. You can regress, you can move forward, you can maybe skip a stage, right? But recognizing which developmental stage a team is in and responding with the right leadership approach, that is what makes all the difference in guiding it toward high performance and sustainable collaboration. So let's unpack some key considerations for managing teams, including norms, accountability, leadership style, communication strategy. So norms are the team's agreed upon behaviors. You could think of it as the unwritten rules that guide day-to-day interaction. There are things like meeting etiquette, decision-making styles, or even how feedback is given. Accountability happens when team members hold each other to those norms and to those agreed upon performance standards. For instance, a project team might establish a norm of speaking up early if deadlines seem unrealistic. Then they hold each other accountable so no one silently overloads one person or excuses missed milestones. Now, the roles in the shared mental models, clearly defined roles help to avoid overlap and confusion. This is important because team members know who's responsible for which tasks. And shared mental models simply just means that members understand the bigger picture, the team's objectives, and then how each contribution connects to that ultimate outcome. Ongoing feedback that helps teams course correct early and reinforces what's working. And recognition and rewards reinforce positive behavior and build motivation. So some tips as leaders: use regular check-ins or retrospectives. What's working well? What's not working well? How can we improve and do things differently? Those regular check-ins are going to be key to ensuring that the team is progressing to that end goal. And then leadership style and participation. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about that, but leadership isn't one size fits all. That leadership style or your leadership style can range from directive to coaching to even hands-off facilitation, depending on the team stage and depending on the competence of the team. Now, in well-functioning teams, leadership shifts from shared decision-making and participation. And that's where we want to shift to, right? Empowering members to own outcomes. So I mentioned a few minutes ago, but as a team matures to the performing stage, a leader should transition from being the decision maker to being the enabler, right? Facilitating collaboration instead of dictating every single step. Now, diversity and cultural awareness. Diversity is great because it brings a broader range of perspectives, which can enhance problem solving, but it also increases complexity around communication and expectations. And multicultural teams require very intentional strategies for inclusion. So being even more intentional about clarifying norms, being sensitive to communication styles, and aligning on shared values or goals. For instance, in a global virtual team, cultural norms oftentimes impact feedback style. Some members may offer, direct critique, while others may avoid confrontation. So establishing very explicit guidelines for constructive feedback actually helps keep collaboration healthy across cultures. So a couple reflection and application prompts. Think about a team that you worked on. What norms were spoken, what norms were unspoken, and how were team members held accountable? Were those roles clearly identified? Or did people actually step on each other's toes? How did feedback flow? Was it regular? Was it constructive, balanced with recognition? Did leadership adapt as the team matured, or did it get stuck in one mode? And then how did diversity show up in your team? Did it help? Did it hinder, and why? The key insight from this section is that managing teams well is about intentionality. Setting norms, clarifying roles, giving timely feedback, adapting leadership, and navigating diversity very thoughtfully is important. So now I want to examine some of the opportunities and the challenges that impact team cohesion, performance, and long-term success. Opportunities. Let's talk about how we can turn conflict into growth. Now, constructive conflict can actually strengthen thought diversity. It can spark innovation. It can deepen commitment if it's managed well. And encouraging task-related disagreement right? Debating over ideas, debating over processes, and not the people can contribute to richer solutions. Now, challenges or threats that can derail team progress, there are several factors that can derail team building if it goes unaddressed. The first is groupthink. And this is a very real thing, and it is a threat. This is where a team values harmonious, approaches or harmony so much so that it avoids critical thinking and suppresses dissent. There's also social loafing, and that is a very real threat to teams. This is where individuals contribute less because maybe they're assuming that others will cover. And that can diminish team performance and morale. And then there's the intra and interpersonal tension. Unresolved personal conflicts or competition can fracture trust and collaboration. For instance, a design team, maybe they go silent in meetings. Maybe they're agreeing on everything superficially, only to face steep setbacks once the project is underway. So, based on proven research, there are some best practices for strong team development. The first is encouraging healthy debate. So, establish norms around respectful disagreement and ensure all voices can contribute. You can set clear expectations and accountability structures to avoid social loafing, define individual roles and track contributions. You can foster psychological safety, not only foster it, but model it. Create an environment where team members feel safe to speak up, ask questions, express concern, and do so without the risk of judgment and without the risk of retribution. And you can also be mindful of transitions and changes. New goals or team members may trigger regression to earlier team stages. So you have to plan accordingly. So pause and evaluate. When have you seen debate lead to better outcomes? And when has conflict led to breakdown? Have you personally experienced groupthink or social loafing in a team? Think about what enabled it and what could have been done differently. And how do you or could you create safety in your group, right? In your own teams? How do we create psychological safety? Now, challenges like conflict or disengagement are not a sign of team failure. In fact, they're very natural parts of team building. And what matters is whether teams and their leaders can transform those moments into opportunities for learning, opportunities for growth, and even stronger collaboration. Now, let's shift to diversity and why diversity matters in teams. Now, diversity across skills, perspectives, backgrounds, experiences can significantly boost team performance by increasing creativity and innovation, improving problem solving and decision making, and even reducing groupthink through varied viewpoints. So, a product development team that includes members with engineering, with user experience, marketing, customer service backgrounds often generate better products than a team composed of only developers because we have diversity of thought. And as we're in this brainstorming phase, we can rely on that diversity of thought to come up with an even better product for our end user. Now, there are challenges of cultural and identity diversity, and diverse teams face very real challenges, especially in the multicultural settings. One could be miscommunication, and that could be due to differing language fluency or communication styles, cultural norms and feedback. So some cultures prefer direct critique, others are more indirect. Some are very task focused, others are much more focused on relationship. That plays a very real part in some of these challenges. Different views on leadership or decision making, and even potential for in-group bias or discomfort when unfamiliar perspectives surface. So in a virtual, maybe international environment or international team, a direct feedback style from one culture may be interpreted as harsh criticism by members from cultures where indirect communication is the norm. There are some best practices for managing diverse team dynamics. Some multicultural teams use very intentional strategies to manage complexity. So again, you can clarify the norms early, establish shared expectations around communication, around feedback, decision-making, and even conflict expression. You can promote inclusive leadership. So encourage quieter voices, rotate meeting leadership, emphasize empathy. You can use structured processes for handling disagreement, ensuring everyone's ideas are heard. And you can also build superordinate identity, where you focus on shared purpose or organizational mission that unites diverse team members beyond the seen or heard differences. So, one thing I've done in a past life is assigned somebody the role of devil's advocate in team collaboration, design thinking, brainstorming sessions. I want somebody in that room, purposely assign them the role of challenging everybody's thinking. That often helps to weed out some of the maybe the ideas that won't work, helps us to think of things differently and strategize differently. That is a great strategy that you can use as a leader. So diversity isn't a challenge to navigate, and you shouldn't look at it as that. It is an asset to unlock, but only with intentional practices that can support inclusion, equitable participation, and even shared direction. So as you continue your learning, think about how you can apply these principles to build teams that thrive because of their differences and not in spite of those differences. Now, what makes multicultural teams distinct? Multicultural teams bring really together a rich mix of perspectives and experiences. And when it's well managed, these teams can harness that increased and enhanced creativity and better decision making. And that's oftentimes due to varied viewpoints and cognitive diversity, which is what we want. And it can also provide the ability to innovate in ways that more homogenous teams cannot, because members challenge assumptions and contribute unique cultural insights. Now, what are some common challenges in multicultural team contexts? They frequently encounter communication barriers, and that's probably one of the most common challenges, probably the top, I would say. But communication barriers from language differences, varied norms, even accents. Some team members may feel excluded if they are less fluent. And I've seen this. I've seen this in my role at global companies. Or they may be perceived as less competent because of some of those differences in fluency. Direct versus indirect feedback styles, where, frank critique clashes with more relational or polite culturals. Oftentimes, this leads to misunderstandings or offense. And then different perceptions of hierarchy, authority, and decision making. And when we have that, it can lead to hesitation or role confusion if it's not consciously addressed. So, what are some best practices and strategies for success to really unlock the full potential of multicultural teams? Again, establish clear norms early about how decisions are made, how feedback is delivered, how meetings are run clearly and collaboratively. You can cultivate CQ, or cultural intelligence and agility, especially among leaders, to navigate subtle differences effectively and build trust across cultures. You can do that by asking people from different cultures, maybe how they like to be communicated with, how they like to receive feedback. You can take training, formal training on how we can build cultural competence or cultural intelligence. And you can create very structured opportunities for interaction and mutual understanding, such as shared projects, maybe cross-cultural workshops to reduce anxiety and facilitate inclusion. And then again, supporting and modeling psychological safety. So making sure diverse team members feel safe to share ideas and challenge the status quo, especially critical in cognitively diverse teams where debate leads to better outcomes. Think through if you've ever been a part of a team with significant cultural diversity. What differences actually enriched or complicated collaboration? Think through if there was, a shared guiding principle or norm that helped bridge cultural differences, and how did differences in feedback and communication styles surface? How were they resolved? It's all important to think through. Now, multicultural teamwork is not optional in today's globalized world. It is essential. And these teams can deliver exceptional performance and innovation, but only with managed with intentional communication, inclusive norms, cultural agility, and even psychological safety. So let's recap. We've explored and spent a bit of time on what it means to build, manage, and sustain effective work teams, which is a skill that is central to organizational success in today's kind of fast-paced, interconnected world. We began by defining what makes a group of individuals a true team. Effective teams share that common purpose, common performance goals, complementary skills, clear practices and norms, and mutual accountability. Teams that function well bring greater creativity, better decision making, and stronger commitment to shared goals than individuals working alone. We then dove into Tuckman's model of team development stages and walked through the 5 stages of team development. Forming, this is where team members get to know one another and look to leadership for guidance. Storming, roles and expectations are oftentimes challenged and sometimes conflict may arise. Norming, where teams' norms solidify and collaboration improves. Performing, this is where the team functions with autonomy and high productivity. And then finally, adjourning. This is where the team disbands and hopefully does so with a sense of achievement. Again, recognize that leaders play very different roles at each stage, shifting from directing to coaching to empowering to supporting. Now, things to consider when managing teams. We explored some key leadership considerations, including establishment of those clear norms and roles, fostering shared mental models, providing ongoing feedback and recognition, creating space for shared leadership and participation, and promoting accountability and psychological safety. Managing teams well means being very intentional about structure and relationships. Then we discussed how conflict, when managed well, can be healthy and productive. However, we also talked about teams facing risk, such as groupthink, right? Which is conformity over critical thinking, or social loafing, so reduced individual effort, and then interpersonal conflict or disengagement. Now, best practices for that we discussed include encouraging debate, setting clear goals, and maintaining trust. We shifted to team diversity. So diverse teams by cultural identity, skill set, or experience bring a lot to the table. Broader perspectives, greater innovation, better decision making. But diversity also increases complexity, which requires us as leaders to be proactive in managing communication, inclusion, and equity. And then finally, we examine multicultural teams. So those made up of members from different cultural and national backgrounds. And these teams require even more special attention. They require awareness of communication and feedback style differences, cross-cultural competence, clear norms and expectations, and culturally intelligent leaderships. When done well, multicultural teams can thrive, and they can also drive exceptional performance globally and innovation. So, final takeaway for all of this is that effective team leadership is intentional. It requires awareness of team development, clarity of roles and norms, a proactive approach to conflict and diversity, and strategies to create a safe collaborative environment. So whether you're managing a small project team or leading in a global organization, I hope that some of these lessons will equip you to build teams that not only perform, but thrive. Thank you.